The sound of splintering porcelain hit me before my hand even left the brass doorknob of my workshop. It was a sharp, brittle crack, followed by the dry, hollow thud of antique wood collapsing under violent force. In my right hand, the velvet-lined case holding the 1890 Gemot, retrieved just an hour ago from the bank's security vault, felt heavy. My fingers froze on the handle. Through the reinforced oak, my daughter-in-law's voice pierced the air, shrill and triumphant, broadcasting live to the internet about $280,000 worth of boomer hoarding meeting reality. I pushed the heavy door open, and the breath was sucked from my lungs. My knees buckled, the world tilting sideways. 40 years. 40 years of quiet mornings, patient hands, and the sacred trust of families who had handed me their most fragile ancestral treasures. Now it was all scattered across the concrete floor like garbage. A rare German automaton bear, an heirloom a grieving widow trusted me to restore, lay headless near my workbench. A collection of Victorian bisque-head dolls and rare stiff teddy bears was reduced to a sickening mosaic of shattered white shards and crushed glass eyes. In the center of this devastation stood my only son, Logan. His face was twisted into a grin completely detached from the boy I had raised. In his hands, he held a heavy steel sledgehammer, swinging it with calculated cruelty, while Chloe held her phone high, streaming my life's work to tens of thousands of strangers on the internet for online views and digital coins. I tried to speak, whispering a broken plea about client trust, but Logan merely sneered straight into the camera lens, dismissing my entire life's work as garbage compared to his student loans. I stepped forward. Every inch felt like walking barefoot across an open wound. Glass crunched beneath my shoes, the remains of custom French varnishes and delicate porcelain fingers. I reached out, holding the velvet Gemot case like a shield, begging him to stop destroying a lifetime of integrity. Logan cut me off with a harsh, barking laugh, mocking 20 years of supposed guilt-tripping, before swinging the sledgehammer in a violent arc directly into the heavy oak restoration bench my father had built in 1958. The thick timber split down the middle with a deafening groan. I lunged forward, dropping the case to grab the heavy steel handle. We struggled for a fraction of a second, and that's when I saw it in his eyes, a cold, burning hatred. With a sharp jerk, Logan ripped the hammer back and shoved his shoulder hard into my chest. I fell backward, my legs giving out. My hands flew out to break the fall, but my right palm landed directly on a jagged pile of broken porcelain. A searing, white-hot pain tore through my flesh. The world tilted into a gray haze as my head struck the concrete. Blood immediately began to pool beneath my hand, warm and thick. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard Chloe cheering over her phone speaker, celebrating the fall as content gold. Logan didn't even look down. He raised the sledgehammer once more, bringing it crashing down upon the humidity unit, a custom unit that had cost me thousands of dollars and 2 years of precise calibration. It crumpled under the iron head like paper. Every single item in that room had a history. The 18th century lace repair bobbins sent to me by an elderly historian, antique music boxes with forgotten melodies. All of it was being pulverized into dust by the very hands I had once guided to hold a pencil. I tried to push myself up, but my body refused to obey. My right hand was mangled, blood pulsing rapidly from a deep laceration. Through the blurred haze of pain, I watched Logan walk towards the far corner, raising the hammer high to strike the final jewel of my collection, a towering Victorian dollhouse that had taken me 3 full years to restore. Dismissing the destruction with a casual shrug, he told Chloe they had enough footage for the stream, and the pair walked out the door. Their laughter echoed through the shattered entrance as they left behind a trail of muddy footprints and total ruin. As the car engine faded down the driveway, the ringing in my ears slowly subsided. The pain in my hand flared hot and sharp, but inside my chest, something strange and absolute was happening. The hot panic vanished, replaced by an unnatural, terrifying clarity. I slowly turned my head, staring at the pool of blood spreading near my fingertips. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The woman who lay broken on that concrete floor died in that exact minute, and in her place, something much colder, much sharper, and infinitely more precise began to wake up. The ringing in my ears faded, leaving behind the steady, rhythmic dripping of blood from my torn palm onto the concrete floor. Outside my workshop window, the quiet suburban streets of Massachusetts woke up to a bright, indifferent Tuesday morning. Cars hummed by, neighbors walked their dogs, and somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up. Inside, my life's work lay in ruins. Walter, my next-door neighbor of 20 years and a retired Boston police investigator, was the first to bang on the front glass. When I finally unlocked the heavy door, his face went pale at the sight of the wreckage and my blood-soaked hand. He pulled out his phone immediately, his voice urgent and shaking. "Martha, God in heaven, I'm calling the precinct right this second." I placed my uninjured hand over his phone, pushing it down slowly. "No, Walter, put it away. A rushed arrest gives them a megaphone. It lets them play victims on the internet. I don't want handcuffs today. I want checkmate." Walter stared at me for a long moment, recognized the absolute resolve in my eyes, and lowered his phone. He helped me bandage my hand with supplies from the first aid kit, then quietly walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage. For the next 48 hours, I didn't cry. I moved through the shards of porcelain like a ghost, carrying a heavy-duty camera. I documented the precise serial numbers, the scattered fragments of 19th century German automaton bears, and the splintered oak. Every broken piece was measured, cataloged, and photographed from 3 different angles, turning the devastation into an airtight forensic archive. While inspecting the high shelf where my rare French restoration tools were kept, my hand brushed against something strange tucked behind an old Victorian mantel clock. It was a small, high-end wireless security camera, magnetically attached to the metal conduit of the ceiling lighting. My fingers grew cold. I climbed down, popped open the side slot, and slid out the micro SD card. Sitting alone at my kitchen table, I inserted the card into my laptop. The video files loaded instantly, organized neatly by date and timestamp, spanning back nearly a full year. The screen flickered to life, showing my son Logan sitting right at my personal workbench 12 months ago. He wasn't working. He was leaning back, laughing lazily, while Chloe stood over him with a notebook. Over the next 4 hours of footage, I sat in absolute, chilling silence as I watched the truth unfold. It wasn't an impulsive fit of rage. It was a calculated strategy executed over 12 months. They had systematically cataloged my inventory, marked the highest value items with no insurance duplicates, and planned the exact streaming angle to maximize viewer shock value. "Just wait until we smash the stiff bear," Logan's voice echoed from the laptop speakers, crystal clear and brimming with casual malice. "The old lady's gonna have a heart attack on camera, and the super chats will easily clear 10 grand. My chest didn't heave with anger. Instead, a profound, chilling numbness settled into my bones. The boy I had raised, the son I had paid thousands of dollars to put through business school, had not only planned to destroy my legacy for internet clout, he had been quietly bleeding me dry behind my back. I opened my online business banking portal, navigating past the standard operating accounts to the line of credit facility linked to my property holdings. My breath caught. There it was, buried beneath layers of automated statement cycles. Over the past 4 months, a series of high-value cash advances and credit card applications had been processed using my social security number, my corporate EIN, and a forged power of attorney signature. $75,000 had vanished in steady, methodical increments. The transaction metadata told the entire story. Luxury boutique hotels in Miami, first-class flights to Cancun, high-end jewelry, and rental payments for a luxury loft in downtown Boston leased under Chloe's name. While he sat at my dinner table crying about how hard the world was, he was systematically gutting my financial foundation to fund a lifestyle of luxury with another woman. I didn't scream at the screen. I closed the laptop lid with deliberate slowness, picked up my landline phone, and dialed a direct number memorized over 15 years of legal asset protection. Victoria Vance's office? A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady, cold, and razor-sharp. "This is Martha Miller. I need your best forensic financial investigators in my workshop within the hour, and I want an emergency federal injunction filed before the banks close today. My son has just committed grand larceny and fraud, and I want every single cent and asset locked down permanently." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a pen clicking against paper. "I'll be at your door in 30 minutes, Martha," Victoria replied, her tone shifting into one of pure, predatory professional alignment. "Let's ruin them." The 31 days that followed the destruction of my workshop passed in a chilling, calculated silence. To the outside world, it looked as though I had retreated into quiet defeat. I did not issue public statements, I did not answer the frantic calls from distant acquaintances, and I did not respond to the escalating wave of online vitriol. In the realm of public perception, silence from a victim is so often misinterpreted as weakness, a crumbling old woman hiding in the shadows out of fear and shame. Logan and Chloe mistook that absolute quiet for total surrender. Buoyed by the viral wreckage of my life's work, Chloe's social media follower count exploded past 100,000 mark within weeks. The original destruction video became a badge of digital honor. They didn't stop at just one clip. They began publishing a serialized campaign of edited, out-of-context shorts and fabricated reels. They painted a picture of a tyrannical, abusive mother who spent decades exploiting her son's labor, framing their destructive rampage as a heroic act of generational liberation. Every day, my phone pinged with hostile alerts, and strangers left hateful comments across my business profiles. Yet I watched it all from my kitchen table with a cold, detached eye, knowing that every single fabrication they posted was merely weaving a thicker rope for their own execution. Behind closed doors, under the direction of my attorney, Victoria Vance, and a team of top-tier forensic investigators, an airtight legal trap was springing shut. We didn't rush to police precincts or scream in public. We gathered bank routing numbers, IP connection logs for the forged credit line applications, notarized property titles, and federal tax filings. Every single piece of evidence was bound into an unassailable federal indictment packet. And then, exactly 31 days after the sledgehammer struck my workbench, the first blow landed in the physical world. It was a crisp Thursday morning when county sheriff's deputies, accompanied by a court-mandated process server, arrived at the luxury rental house in downtown Boston, where Logan and Chloe had been living high on my stolen capital. The formal eviction notice, backed by an immediate writ of possession due to lease default and fraudulent financial underwriting, was slapped onto their front door, while the deputies secured the premises. By sheer coincidence, or supreme arrogance, Chloe was in the middle of a live broadcast when the deputies knocked. Through my laptop screen in the quiet safety of my home office, I watched the stream unfold in real time. Chloe's face beamed brightly into the camera ring light, her voice dripping with manufactured distress as she wailed to her followers about a corrupt, boomer-run system trying to throw them out on the street for speaking the truth, frantically begging her audience for emergency super chat donations. The digital chat scrolled at lightning speed with angry donations and furious comments attacking me. But the digital circus came to an abrupt, screeching halt the moment Logan opened the front door to confront the authorities. Stepping out from behind the deputies was a quiet, sharp-eyed man in a tailored charcoal suit, Marcus, the lead private investigator retained by Victoria's firm. He didn't raise his voice or engage in a shouting match. He simply walked past the flashing phone camera, bypassed the bewildered deputies, and stepped directly up to Logan, who stood staring blankly at the eviction papers. Marcus reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a heavy manila envelope bearing federal seals, and pressed it firmly against Logan's chest, announcing with crystal-clear precision that he had been formally served with federal indictments for identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny exceeding $75,000. Logan's face instantly drained of all color, the bravado evaporating from his eyes as he stammered in disbelief, trying to deny the reality unfolding before him. Marcus cut through his panicked protests with absolute calm, reminding him that his mother hadn't just filed criminal charges, but had completely audited his entire lifestyle. Before Logan could pull his hands away from the manila packet, Marcus slipped a smaller secondary envelope from his breast pocket and tossed it on the porch table right beside Chloe's active phone tripod. The envelope popped open as it landed, sliding out a neat stack of glossy 8x10 color photos and printed text logs. The top photograph captured Chloe stepping out of a high-end downtown boutique, arm in arm with a wealthy, middle-aged local media executive, the very man who had supposedly been sponsoring their independent startup fund. Beneath it were detailed hotel reservation receipts, private chat transcripts, and bank transaction statements showing thousands of dollars transferred directly from my stolen credit lines into a secret account funding Chloe's apartment lease with her lover. Chloe shrieked, lunging frantically toward the table to grab the photographs, but it was far too late. The camera angle, held steady by her tripod, captured every single frame in crystal-clear definition for the tens of thousands of live viewers watching in real time. The chat room, which had spent the last month cheering for their crusade, instantly froze, then exploded into a violent wave of betrayal, mockery, and malicious laughter. Comments scrolled past so fast they blurred together, exposing the grift, mocking the sudden exposure, and tearing the couple apart before a global audience. I closed my laptop lid, the soft click echoing softly in the empty room. I didn't smile and I didn't gloat. I simply poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, watching the morning sunlight filter through the window, knowing that the trap had snapped shut with absolute, irreversible perfection. From my vantage point inside the car parked 2 blocks down the system-shielded street, through the heavy gray sheets of an autumn Massachusetts rain, the final act of their digital empire looked remarkably small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. The Livestream had not automatically cut off when Marcus dropped the manila envelopes onto the porch table. Instead, caught in the sudden, suffocating panic of total exposure, the phone camera had tilted, framing the wet pavement and the frantic, stammering movements of 2 people realizing their carefully constructed world had turned to dust. Tens of thousands of online viewers remained hooked, refusing to log off as they watched every shattered fragment of the grift unfold in real time. Logan stood completely frozen in the downpour, his hands trembling violently as he stared down at the legal documents and glossy photographs scattered across the wet concrete. But it wasn't the federal indictments for identity theft or the detailed bank statements showing thousands in stolen funds that finally broke his composure.
His eyes were locked on a single photograph near the bottom of the stack, an image of the media executive's wrist, clearly displaying the heavy, gold-plated antique pocket watch I had handed him on his college graduation day, neatly engraved with his initials on the back. The family heirloom he had tearfully claimed was lost during a violent mugging 2 years ago was now proudly wrapped around the arm of his wife's lover, purchased and maintained by the very capital he had methodically stolen from my life's work. A sharp, hysterical laugh tore from Logan's throat, cutting right through the steady hiss of the falling rain. He whipped around to face Chloe, demanding answers about her betrayal and the secret financial accounts backing her luxury lifestyle. Chloe didn't bother to deny it. Stripped of her ring-light glow, smooth skin filters, and manufactured online persona, her face twisted into a snarl of pure, unfiltered contempt. She turned on him with venomous intensity, screaming that he was a talentless parasite who couldn't even afford a decent apartment without stealing from his aging mother, mocking him for ever believing she would stay tied to a loser once the digital grift ran dry. The argument escalated into a vicious, screaming confrontation right there on the open sidewalk under the pouring rain. Passers-by slowed down to stare, and delivery trucks blared their horns, while the phone tripod, still propped up against the brick wall, captured every ugly, desperate second of their mutual destruction for an audience of over 80,000 live spectators. Realizing her subscriber count was plummeting by the tens of thousands as angry comments flooded the chat with accusations of fraud and betrayal, Chloe shrieked in blind panic, grabbed the tripod, and smashed the phone hard against the pavement, cutting the live stream into abrupt, static-filled darkness. I watched the scene unfold through my windshield, feeling neither anger nor pity, only an icy, detached satisfaction settling deep in my chest. They stood there in the freezing rain, drenched to the bone and screaming at each other amidst cardboard boxes and luggage bags piled high on the wet curb, completely abandoned by their fickle online followers, stripped of their stolen funds, and drowning in the very trap they meticulously engineered to destroy me. Every lie they had broadcasted, every fabricated accusation of abuse, and every dollar they had pilfered had returned to crush them with mathematical precision. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't roll down the window to offer a final word, a warning, or a cold reminder of the wreckage they had caused. There was no need for me to intervene, because reality was doing a far more thorough job than I ever could. The internet had turned their back on them, the federal law was closing in, and their artificial world of lies had evaporated into nothingness. I shifted my car into drive, my hands steady on the steering wheel, pulled away from the curb and drove home into the quiet morning, leaving them behind to choke on the bitter harvest of their own making.
From my vantage point inside the car parked 2 blocks down the system-shielded street, through the heavy gray sheets of an autumn Massachusetts rain, the final act of their digital empire looked remarkably small, fragile, and utterly pathetic. The rain cleared by Friday afternoon, leaving the Massachusetts air crisp and sharp, smelling of wet earth and change. While Logan and Chloe were learning the brutal cost of their digital theater, my own world was beginning to breathe again, not with the fragile breath of the past, but with the cold, unyielding steel of absolute renewal. The first battleground was the conference room of Sterling and Crest Insurance, where 3 senior corporate adjusters had spent the first 10 weeks trying to dismiss my claim as property negligence and family dispute. That was before Victoria Vance laid a certified copy of the federal indictment packet, bank transfer logs, and forged power of attorney signatures across their polished mahogany table. The meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes. By the time I stood up to leave, the corporate tone had shifted from condescending bureaucracy to terrified compliance.
The final settlement check for $250,000, accompanied by a signed letter acknowledging complete liability and waiver of dispute, was wired directly into my corporate account before the weekend bell rang. With the capital secured, the reconstruction of my workshop began under the hands of skilled contractors and master builders. We stripped the concrete floors down, installed reinforced security architecture, and rebuilt the historic oak workbench based on my father's original 1958 blueprints. Yet the physical rebuilding was only half the victory. Word of the federal crackdown and the explosive downfall of my son's grift had rippled through the historic restoration circles of New England, turning my name overnight into a symbol of quiet, terrifying resilience. It was during the final stages of the workshop reinforcement that Julian Sterling walked through my freshly hung front door. Julian was the legendary chairman and chief auctioneer of Sterling and Crest Fine Arts, a man whose word dictated multi-million-dollar museum acquisitions across the eastern seaboard. He stood in the center of the clean, sunlit floor, his sharp eyes scanning the freshly painted walls and the velvet case holding the 1890 Jumeau doll I had rescued from the bank vault weeks ago. He walked slowly toward my workbench, picked up a fine-grained bristle brush, and laid it back down with deliberate respect. The insurance settlement and the federal indictments made quite a stir in Boston, Martha, said Julian, his voice deep and measured, carrying the weight of decades in the high-end antiquities market. Everyone's talking about how you brought down a digital empire from your kitchen table, but what interests me is the hands that survived it. He didn't waste time with empty condolences. He unfolded a heavy parchment document from his leather portfolio and slid it across the clean wood surface toward me. It was an executive contract proposing the creation of a brand new division, the Heritage Restoration Wing of Sterling and Crest. Julian offered me the position of Senior Director of Global Heritage Restoration, with a sprawling, fully staffed studio twice the size of my old workshop, complete freedom over artifact selection, and an annual compensation package that would ensure my legacy remained untouched by financial vulnerability for the rest of my life. I looked at the contract, then up at Julian, feeling a profound, quiet stillness settle over my spirit. The woman who had bled on that concrete floor a month ago was entirely gone. In her place stood someone far stronger, carrying a vision that stretched far beyond personal vindication. I will accept your offer, Julian, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute purpose, under two non-negotiable conditions. Julian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine intrigue crossing his weathered face. Name them, Martha. First, the division will house an independent endowment fund named the Sally Miller Heritage Scholarship, funded by a percentage of every restoration project, dedicated to putting underprivileged youth through traditional artisan trade schools. Second, my workshop remains autonomous. Julian stared at me for a long, silent moment before a slow, approving smile broke across his face. He extended his hand across the desk, sealing the partnership with a firm, respectful grip. 3 months later, the new wing was fully operational. The walls were lined with rare European clocks, delicate porcelain pieces entrusted by world-class museums, and the newly restored Victorian dollhouse. But the most important fixture in the room wasn't an antique, it was a young man standing near the secondary workbench, carefully holding a fine-grade ivory lace repair bobbin with hands that did not tremble. His name was Leo, an orphan from a local community college program who possessed an innate, astonishing patience for fine detail and a deep, abiding respect for history. He'd walked into my workshop weeks ago, looking for a chance, carrying none of the entitlement or cruelty that had poisoned my own bloodline. As I watched him steady his breath and guide a fine-grained needle through a torn 18th-century tapestry fragment, the morning sunlight washed across the polished oak floors. The past was gone, burned away by fire and ice, but what remained in its place was an empire built not on sand, but on unshakable integrity, unbreakable will, and hands that refused to break. The New England winter arrived with a brutal, biting frost that froze the muddy ruts of the city streets and drove ordinary people indoors. But for Logan, the real winter had set in months before, freezing his future long before the snow ever touched the ground. Chloe's departure had been as swift as it was merciless. The moment the federal indictments dropped and the media executive realized his professional reputation was hanging by a thread, he severed all ties, canceled the lease on their luxury apartment, and changed his phone numbers overnight. Chloe, left with no money, 0 followers, and a mounting wave of online mockery, packed whatever designer bags she could salvage and vanished into the night with a new target, leaving Logan behind to face the wreckage of his own making alone. Without a college degree, with a pending federal felony charge for identity theft and wire fraud permanently staining his record, and with his name globally synonymous with online grift, Logan's life had collapsed into an inescapable freefall. Fired from every job he applied for within hours of background checks, evicted from every temporary shelter that discovered his criminal status, he finally ended up living out of the back seat of a battered, frost-covered sedan parked in underground lots and dark side streets across the city. It was late November when the true test of human grace found me in the damp concrete shadows of a downtown parking garage. I had been working late at the newly expanded Sterling Wing, reviewing rare restoration portfolios until past midnight. The garage was mostly empty, echoing with the distant hum of ventilation pipes and the steady drip of melting snow from overhead pipes. As I walked toward my car carrying my leather briefcase, 2 local muggers materialized from the dark recess behind a concrete pillar, blocking my path and demanding my bag with rough, threatening gestures. Before I could even reach for my heavy brass keys, a ragged figure bolted out from the shadows of a parked van. It was Logan. He didn't hesitate, didn't stop to calculate the risks, and didn't care about his own safety. Armed only with a heavy iron tire iron he had grabbed from his trunk, he lunged directly at the 2 men, screaming with a desperate, feral fury that echoed off the concrete walls. He swung the iron bar with reckless abandon, catching the first assailant across the shoulder and driving the second one back in sheer shock. But the scuffle was brutal and short. One of the men pulled a heavy hunting knife from his jacket pocket, plunging it deep into Logan's shoulder before both attackers panicked and bolted into the night, disappearing up the exit ramp. Logan collapsed hard onto the freezing concrete, a spreading pool of dark blood soaking through his thin winter jacket. I dropped my briefcase, rushed to his side, and dropped to my knees in the freezing slush. My hands shook violently as I pressed my palms against his torn jacket, feeling the warm, rapid surge of his blood. Without a second thought, I pulled the heavy silk scarf from my neck, the very silk scarf my mother had woven for my 50th birthday, and tied it tightly around his shoulder wound, pressing down with all my strength to stem the bleeding while dialing emergency services with my trembling fingers. The ambulance sirens screamed through the Boston night, cutting through the freezing air like a blade. Hours later, under the sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital recovery room, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the quiet space. When Logan finally opened his eyes, the defiance and arrogance that had defined his youth were completely gone, replaced by a hollow, agonizing void of absolute shame. He stared up at the white ceiling, tears spilling silently from the corners of his eyes, cutting pale tracks down his bruised cheeks. His voice, when it came, was a broken, choking whisper that barely rose above the hum of the IV drip. "I ruined everything, Mom." Logan wept, his body trembling beneath the white hospital sheets, as he confessed the bitter, crushing weight of his choices, admitting how his blinding jealousy and toxic resentment had destroyed his hands, his marriage, and his soul. I stood beside his bed, looking down at the son who had once tried to tear my life apart with a sledgehammer. My heart did not leap with triumphant joy, nor did it harden with bitter satisfaction. Instead, a profound, steady quiet settled over my chest. I reached out, my fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from his damp forehead, offering the quiet, enduring grace of a mother who had survived the fire and emerged whole.
The sterile white walls of the hospital room seemed to compress time, holding Logan and me in a fragile, suspended reality, far away from the flashing lights of courtrooms and the digital theater of the internet. For 3 weeks, as his shoulder slowly healed under medical supervision, no lawyers visited, no media cameras peered through the glass, and the frantic noise of the outside world faded into a distant, muffled hum. It was just the two of us, bound together not by blood alone, but by the jagged, heavy architecture of survival and the sobering realization of what we had both lost. When the doctors finally cleared him for discharge, Logan did not return to a luxury rental or a fugitive's frost-covered car. He returned to the workshop under my direct, unyielding supervision, carrying a single duffel bag containing every remaining personal possession he owned in the world. The morning sun cast long, clean lines across the polished oak floors of the newly reconstructed restoration wing as Victoria Vance stepped out from her private office holding a single, heavy document bound in black cardstock. It wasn't a criminal indictment this time, nor was it a civil summons meant to terrify him. It was an employment contract, the most uncompromising, rigorous, and disciplined document ever drafted under my roof. I set the contract down on the central workbench right in front of him. Logan stared down at the crisp white pages, his eyes scanning the dense legal clauses with growing disbelief and mounting panic. The terms were absolute and unyielding. He was hired exclusively as a junior warehouse custodian and manual laborer, assigned to the heavy materials storage basement, completely barred from stepping foot near the high-end antique restoration wing, forbidden to touch delicate porcelain or clocks, and strictly banned from any client-facing duties. His hourly compensation was set firmly at the state minimum wage. Furthermore, pursuant to a binding civil restitution agreement, exactly 60% of his monthly earnings would be automatically deducted to pay down the $180,000 in legal fees, property damages, and financial liabilities he had accumulated during his reckless months of fraud. Logan lifted his head slowly, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with a bitter mix of shock, profound humiliation, and desperate realization. He looked from the document up to my face, his voice trembling as he asked how he was supposed to survive on what little remained after the deductions. I did not raise my voice, nor did I let a flicker of emotional hesitation soften my expression. I looked straight into his eyes with a calm, unbreakable steadiness that left no room for argument. I saved your life in that parking garage because you carry this family's blood, Logan, and I could never stand by and watch you die in the dark, I said, my tone as steady and unrelenting as the stone foundation beneath our feet. The silence in the workshop was absolute, broken only by the distant ticking of an antique grandfather clock on the wall and the heavy rhythm of his breathing. Logan's hands shook violently as he picked up the heavy metal fountain pen lying beside the contract. For a long, agonizing moment, he stared at the nib, wrestling with the final, stubborn remnants of his shattered pride.
Then, with a slow, heavy exhale that seemed to purge the last vestiges of his arrogance, he lowered the pen to the paper. Under the sharp, watchful gaze of Victoria Vance, who stood quietly by the doorway with her arms crossed, Logan signed his name at the bottom of the page. It wasn't a punishment designed to break him into dust. It was an anvil designed to forge him into something real, honest, and accountable. As he set the pen down and shouldered his duffel bag to walk down toward the basement storage rooms, the morning light finally caught the dust motes dancing in the air, clean, weightless, and entirely free of the shadows of the past.
1 year had slipped by like the steady, unhurried flow of the Charles River past the historic brick warehouses of Boston. The scars of the past had not magically vanished, but they had been carefully sanded down, polished, and transformed into something enduring. The grand reopening of the newly expanded Sterling and Crest Heritage Wing had taken place under a clear autumn sky 12 months after the workshop's destruction. Scholars, museum curators, and master artisans from across New England gathered to celebrate the revival, praising not just the rare antiques and restored porcelain on display, but the unbreakable institutional will that had brought the studio back from total ruin. Yet, amidst the applause and media attention, the most profound transformation was happening quietly on the ground floor, far away from the flashing cameras. Logan was entirely unrecognizable compared to the arrogant, phone-clutching grifter he had been a year ago. He had lost weight, his shoulders were broader from heavy lifting, and lines of genuine labor now marked his face. Every single morning, long before the sun crested over the harbor, he arrived at the workshop by 5 o'clock to tackle the grueling inventory and material hauling tasks assigned to the basement warehouse. He never raised his voice, never complained about the endless manual labor, and never dared to meet my eyes or the eyes of the young apprentices with a sense of entitlement. The defiant, hollow bravado had been thoroughly scrubbed away, replaced by a grim, quiet endurance and a daily discipline born from accountability. The culmination of that year arrived on a crisp Friday evening at the annual Boston Fine Arts Guild Gala inside the grand marble hall of the city's premier museum. The chandelier light caught the silver in my hair as I walked up to the central podium to accept the Guild's highest Lifetime Achievement Award for Preservation and Heritage Restoration. The applause from the packed auditorium was sustained and thunderous, a sea of distinguished faces honoring a lifetime dedicated to breathing life back into forgotten history. As I stood behind the mahogany podium, looking out over the glowing hall, my eyes drifted past the front rows filled with dignitaries and patrons, scanning all the way to the dark, quiet shadows at the very back of the room. Standing entirely alone in the far corner, wearing a plain, neatly pressed dark jacket that was one size too large for his leaner frame, was Logan. He wasn't smiling with pride, nor was he seeking validation. He stood with his hands respectfully clasped in front of him, quietly wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, clapping his hands in a soft, subdued rhythm so as not to draw any attention to himself. When our eyes met across the vast expanse of the hall, he didn't look away in shame. Instead, he gave a slow, respectful nod of absolute acknowledgement, his eyes shimmering with a quiet, hard-earned redemption. Later that evening, after the gala concluded and the crowds had drifted out into the cool New England night, I stepped out alone onto the wide stone balcony overlooking the Charles River. The sun was sinking below the western skyline, casting long ribbons of liquid gold and deep amber across the dark, moving water, reflecting brilliantly against the calloused skin and faint scars on my hands that had held a sledgehammer, shaped wood, stitched lace, and ultimately held a family together when it threatened to shatter into dust.
Leaning against the wrought iron railing, I let the cool evening breeze wash over my face as the profound truth of the journey settled deep into my bones. True victory had never been about bitter revenge, nor was it ever measured by the recovery of lost capital or public prestige. The ultimate triumphs lay in holding fast to one's integrity, refusing to let cruelty poison the soul, and summoning the extraordinary patience to teach a lost, selfish child how to stand up straight from the ashes of his own undoing. The most complete victories in life do not arrive with the thunderous roar of cheering crowds or the flashing lights of digital applause. They are profoundly quiet, deep, and enduring, as steady and timeless as the river, and as eternal as the heritage we choose to build with our own hands.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in, and what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.